With a cast as large as the one in My Hero Academia, there is bound to be a wide variety in both quality and relevance. Be it in the classes at UA or the top hero rankings, Hiraka has filled itself with a massive group of diverse characters, some obviously more interesting than others. But one character that seems to have garnered a bit of a reputation as a wasted opportunity and a disappointment is one of the newer villains introduced, Redestro, leader of the Meta Liberation Army. I disagree with this idea completely, and I want to quickly chat about why. Lightning recap. Rikiya Yotsubahashi is the last descendant of Destro, a revolutionary who fought for a world where everyone can use their quirks to their heart's content, free of any restrictions. This liberation failed within Destro's lifetime, but his family kept the fight going by amassing funds and growing their influence in the shadows, until Rikiya took up the mantle and became the leader of the secret organization, called the Meta Liberation Army. Taking on the name of Redestro, he sees the growing influence of the League of Villains as a threat. There can only be one revolution, and if Shigaraki gets too big, he might detract from their shine in the crucial hour. So, he kidnaps the League's broker, Giran, and challenges them to an all-out battle in Deika City, a town completely controlled by the MLA. They fight, and, after Shigaraki awakens the terrifying potential of his decaying quirk, Redestro surrenders himself and his empire to Shigaraki. Aight. So what are we working with here? Why is this guy supposedly a disappointment? Well, the general points of that seem to go mostly into one of these directions. His defeat is contrived/lame, his only purpose is to develop Shigaraki, and he lost relevance after one arc. I might have missed a few, but these are the ones I personally observe the most often, and this is my video, so... So, why do I disagree with all of these? So glad you asked. Let's start with numéro 1. Whether it's lame or not is pretty subjective and depends heavily on what you wanted from the character, but it being contrived is, I think, very hard to defend when looking at Redestro as a character. Rikiya cares about two things: the lives of his compatriots and the purity of Destro's will. The former is shown, for example, when he weeps about the death of Curious and explains how precious human life is. What's important here is that he doesn't weep just for Curious, but for every life lost in this battle, and yet he doesn't interrupt the fight. He can tolerate death to an extent, especially in the name of Destro's will, but it still pains him. And that will is the second thing he cares about, which is demonstrated in his introduction scene, when he kills his co-worker because they express a distaste for Destro's will and disrespect him. This scene also establishes the conflict between these two points of care, as Redestro weeps while killing Miyashita. He doesn't like it, but he feels that he has to do it to protect and honor Destro. So, what we have is a character that values life, especially that of his co-combatants, but will tolerate death if it serves the will of his ideals. With all of that in mind, let's look at the situation he found himself in when facing Shigaraki in Deika. Redestro challenged Shigaraki based on a few assumptions, namely that he'd be overwhelming a tired and ragged band of exhausted hoodlums, and that his MLA was ideologically more organized and pure than the chaotic League of Villains. What he did not, however, predict was Shigaraki's awakening, which freed him from the limitations imposed on his quirk by his traumatic retrograde amnesia. This is a crucial development because, in this moment, Shigaraki becomes truly liberated. He is free of his past, any worry of the future, any social restrictions and rules, and any and all anxiety. He is liberation personified, just a man with a quirk, happy and free to use it. In short, he is the embodiment of Destro's ideal. Suddenly, Redestro isn't crushing a small group of deranged gangsters in the name of his goal anymore. Suddenly, he is facing and fighting the true image of liberation, his actual goal. And he is absolutely outshined by Shigaraki in that regard. Redestro is shackled by his bloodline, his ties to Detnerat, his family legacy, and the mission put onto him. And as he states himself, Shigaraki faces this mountain of aspects and legacies and laughs. Another thing to consider is Redestro's quirk, which converts all of his stress, anger, anxiety, and upset into physical power. This is a really cool quirk for him to have, since we get this revolutionary who literally weaponizes the anger that he feels at the broken and unjust system, which is a really cool concept. But beyond that, this quirk is also an aspect that holds him back from being a true symbol of liberation, since he will always be shackled by his negative feelings. He will never be able to release himself from stress and anxiety, since they are intrinsically connected to his power. A far cry from the unburdened and smiling Shigaraki. And if that weren't enough, Redestro never actually gets to use his full power in their fight, because Shigaraki's presence automatically causes Redestro's quirk to weaken and power down, meaning that he subconsciously rejoices seeing Destro's will given form, which decreases his stress and in turn power. Shigaraki is such a true symbol of liberation that it puts Redestro's heart at ease without the latter even realizing it first. So, now the man who is willing to tolerate death in the name of his ideals is forced to see that his opponent is embodying those very ideals better than anyone else could. Not only that, but his enemy has also awakened a power that allows him to level cities in seconds. Given that, Redestro simply has no reason to keep throwing the lives of his comrades away into this massive calamity, because he has already been defeated on an ideological level. Redestro cares about the lives of his army, and he sees no point in risking them against this massively powerful force when they're not even really fighting for Destro's ideals will anymore, as much as ironically opposing them. One could say, oh, but if he believes in his ideals so much, why didn't he just go out in a blaze of glory over them? But let's be real, that's not who Redestro is. His family has been grooming him for the task of liberation for his entire life, and his bloodline has been preparing for generations. He himself has been playing the long game too, slowly biding his time and infiltrating more and more parts of society. He is clearly someone who plans ahead and looks into the future pragmatically, so throwing all of his resources and life away into a single hopeless battle just wouldn't be in character for him. He had already lost Curious, who, as the publishing CEO of Shueisha, was an immense asset for an organization that needs precise control over public opinion and conscience. How much more would he lose in a potential battle against both a liberated Shigaraki and Gigantomachia? A battle which would not only be insanely costly financially and in terms of lives, but also a direct conflict with Destro's ideal. Under these circumstances, and knowing that Shigaraki would accept nothing less, a complete surrender was the smartest move in order to ensure the longevity and continuous growth of the liberation ideal. So, when looking at Redestro as a character and at the situation he found himself in, I think it's fairly evident that his surrender makes perfect sense and was founded upon a clear logic and consistency. Man cares about lives, but will tolerate death if it's in the name of his ideals. Realizes fight is not only incredibly deadly, but also not in the name of his ideals anymore. Gives up. Makes perfect sense. And, if I may say so myself, it was a pretty cool moment that had immense ramifications for the series going forward, and I think was well executed. This is a funny one because, yes, his primary purpose was to move Shigaraki forward in his progression. Question though, why is that a bad thing? There seems to be this weird notion around that if you can determine what the purpose of a character is, that somehow makes them bad, and I'm just, what? Ideally, in a tightly constructed narrative, every element will have a role to fulfill with elegance and consistency. That role being unobscured doesn't make or break a character. If anything, it solidifies them as an important part of a plot's progression. The better worded complaint here would be, he is insignificant beyond progressing Shigaraki. This would be an issue, because at that point it would indicate that his role as a progression catalyst was all that Redestro would have going for him, turning him into a mere plot device, which would be unelegant and just not very good. How lucky then, though, that this complaint, while better worded, is as unfounded as the first version. Here are a few things that Redestro does and is which are completely removed from his purpose regarding Shigaraki. He opens up a tremendous amount of additional information about the world of Hiraka, bringing in aspects from public opinion, relations, politics, and corporate business, and showing us how these aspects behave in a superhuman society. He also gives us a decent amount of lore regarding quirks, both in their historic origins and the questionable history of the word itself, and in their actual behavior and potential growth. He presents an ideology that would, of course, exist in a world like Hiraka, which itself opens up the narrative to presumably discuss more different ideas and perspectives on what being super means in the future. And he's just plain entertaining and fun to follow. As a villain, he's completely different from the dudes we've seen so far. Professional, courteous, well-mannered and well-spoken, he brings in an additional note of variety into the cast of characters that is very welcome. As you can see, the man brings plenty to the table aside from just his primary purpose. And even if you want to dismiss all of that, because I don't know why you would, he fulfills that main purpose so well that I can't really agree on this as a negative. Redestro is to Shigaraki what Overhaul was to Deku. When Deku fights Overhaul, he is faced with the leader of an underground organization whose ideals are to rip society apart completely while using a quirk that allows him to disassemble and kill with a touch. Sound familiar? Meanwhile, when Shigaraki confronts Redestro, he is opposed by an idealist who has the support of a massive system on his side and who is revolted by Shigaraki's chaotic evil nonsense, combating him with a quirk that grants him heightened physical abilities in percentual increments. Sound familiar? The point is that Shigaraki and Deku have, since the very beginning, been parallel characters. What one goes through, the other also experiences in their own way, on two parallel journeys that will eventually intersect in their inevitable clash. Redestro is therefore a way for this parallel to be enabled, and he does so pretty well by paralleling the Overhaul arc for Shigaraki. And aside from just that, he also sets the narrative up for a massive event, one that had been brewing and foreshadowing for a long time, but now became palpable thanks to the marriage of the League of Villains and the MLA. In short, Redestro does mainly catalyze Shigaraki's growth, that is true, but not only does he do that pretty elegantly and entertainingly, but he also brings in numerous elements into the story that develop it and the world into a more critical and interesting phase. Also, he is cool as shit. So, while saying that he only exists to simp for Shigaraki can be argued to be correct, I think it's insanely reductive and not really reasonable to do so. This one is interesting because it has a super simple answer. You don't know that. Koei Horikoshi is nowhere near as predictable as people like to pretend he is. No one saw Endeavor's arc coming before it got teased in Remedial. No one expected Infinite 100% on a weekly read, trust me, I was there, and basically no one predicted a 22-week villain-only saga. My point is, a general cocky attitude regarding the story's predictability isn't really an adequate outlook, considering how creative the story actually gets and has gotten in the past. The only way you're ever actually gonna accurately predict what Horikoshi's gonna do next is by looking at his writing style specifically. And what is his writing style? Well, for the most part, it's all about implanting small, insignificant seeming seeds throughout the story and letting them blossom into major plot points later on. It is kind of similar to One Piece in that regard, although of course not at that length. In an earlier video I called it the toolbox approach. The small hints of Endeavor's conflict eventually turned into one of the most compelling arcs in the entire series, and the tiny details of Kirishima's attitude, especially his calm and frightful expressions, were later recontextualized by a backstory and sequence of events that turned the side character into pretty much a part of the main cast. In short, Horikoshi loves to bring things back again and again, with a tendency of creating a setup, letting it remain dormant for a while until it's time to use it for maximum effect. Looking at this pattern, Redestro being just forgotten about is not only very much not a certainty, it's even pretty unlikely. He is, currently, Shigaraki's right-hand man, and while he seems to wholeheartedly believe in Shigaraki himself, he seems less thrusting of the rest of the league. Moreover, his own lieutenants seem even less psyched about the whole union, and it is pretty evident that this will, in one way or another, come back up again. A character not being currently utilized is in no way a confirmation that they have lost relevance forever, as we have seen with Kirishima. Hell, Mirko got 2 panels and then wasn't seen for a year, only for her to become a major point of focus in this current war arc. Many don't know Horikoshi's writing as well as they think they do, and I'd say it's smarter to not base your dislike of a character on a prediction that is founded on nothing but cynical pessimism. A character doesn't have to constantly be the focus of every single chapter to remain relevant, and they can take breaks from their relevance as well, and that is something that Horikoshi has consistently done and will probably continue to do so with Redestro. Obviously, I can't know this, just as you can't know that he's lost relevance. My time machine has just recently broke, rip. But, looking at Horikoshi's writing style, one thing seems more likely than the other, and it's not him fading into the background. So, after having looked at these 3 points, I think you can see why I consider Redestro to not be a wasted character, but instead a well-integrated piece of Hiroaka's cast. His inclusion catalyzed some of the most important events the manga has seen thus far. It facilitated the growth and maturity of one of the best new-gen villains, and he himself brought with him lore and context that expanded the series nicely, as well as him just being a fun guy to follow through a believable and logical arc that leaves him with much room and potential for the future. Thanks for watching, take care, wash your hands, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.